Walking away from someone to whom you once gave your heart rarely feels like power in the beginning. It feels more like a funeral, one that no one else notices, not even the person you are leaving behind. You question yourself. You wonder whether it ever meant anything at all. And yet the act of leaving is far more significant than it first appears. Carl Jung believed that every relationship is a mirror, a reflection of our inner world. When a woman walks away, especially not in anger, but in quiet pursuit of peace, that mirror cracks. The man she leaves may not admit it, but something inside him shifts. He no longer has the reflection he relied on to define himself, and that absence leaves him staring into the raw emptiness of who he really is. In the earliest days after her absence, what collapses first is not his soul, but his ego. Jung described the ego as the image we project to the world, the mask of who we think we are. For many men who have not done the difficult inner work, that mask is fragile and often held together by control rather than love. As long as she stays, explains, or reacts, his ego feels secure. Her emotional availability translates into validation, not necessarily into true intimacy, but into proof that he still matters. The moment she steps away, falls silent, and refuses to feed the cycle of endless explanations, his sense of dominance is disrupted. What he feels then is irritation, even contempt, because pride has been bruised. He might become cold, sarcastic, or detached, acting as if nothing touches him. But beneath that facade, the foundation of his self-image begins to tremble. That is the paradox. Men are not often taught to process grief in its raw form. They are taught to conquer, to take, to fix. But when she leaves with calm resolve rather than with explosive drama, all the strategies he has learned collapse in his hands. There is no battle to win, no ground to claim, no opponent to overpower, only silence. And that silence begins to whisper the truth that he was never really in control. In those empty hours when there is nothing left to dominate, he begins to face the question he avoided. Who am I without her reflection? Who am I without her belief in me? This is when Jung's idea of the shadow becomes unavoidable. The shadow is the unconscious storehouse of everything we deny: neediness, fear, shame, the desperate hunger for validation. While she was still present, her love acted as a buffer. Her patience and care kept those hidden wounds at bay. But the moment she leaves, that buffer disappears, and the shadow awakens. Suddenly there is no one to absorb his unspoken insecurities, no one to carry the weight he refused to name, and when he is left alone with himself, the unhealed parts of his psyche begin to speak. At first, he may try to drown out those voices with distractions. He may chase new women, throw himself into work, post carefully curated images of strength. He will tell himself, and anyone who will listen, that he is unaffected. But the unconscious cannot be silenced so easily. Jung taught that what is repressed eventually resurfaces, often in the very moments when one believes it has been forgotten. It resurfaces in the middle of the night, in the quiet of an empty room, or in the sudden sting of a memory, her voice, her laughter, her gaze that once steadied him. What he begins to feel is not just the loss of a person, but the echo of everything she once held for him. Regret does not strike like a lightning bolt. It moves slowly, slipping into his life after the noise has faded. At first, he is proud, even relieved, convincing himself that freedom is what he wanted. He fills the days with activity, as though momentum itself could shield him from absence. But in time, the distractions thin. The new connections do not run as deep. The noise grows hollow, and the quiet returns. That is when the real weight descends. He begins to recall not the arguments or the final silences, but the subtle things, the way she steadied him in moments of chaos, the way she saw him clearly even when he did not know how to see himself. And that realization does not announce itself with fanfare. It comes quietly, in the recognition that he let something real slip through his hands, something he may never encounter again. The mirror she once held up to him now reflects only inadequacy. Jung suggested that we do not see the world as it is, but as we are. When she leaves, she takes away the softened reflection, the version of himself that looked stronger and more complete under her gaze. What he sees now is unfiltered. He sees his own broken promises, his avoidance, the times she gave and he turned away. Shame begins to surface, and Jung insisted that shame can be one of the greatest teachers if we allow it. For him, however, shame is not just about the mistakes he made. It is about the man he failed to become. He realizes she believed in him more than he ever believed in himself, and now that belief is gone. Without her, he is left with nothing but the image of a man who had something extraordinary and did not know how to hold it. The impact of her leaving is not only in the void she leaves behind, but in the potential she withdraws. He doesn't just lose her, he loses the chance to become the version of himself she saw in him. That absence lingers like an accusation, but also like a truth too painful to name. For some men, this is the moment transformation begins. For others, it is the moment the cycle repeats. Some men, when faced with this moment, finally turn inward. They begin to understand what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole by confronting the shadow and integrating what has long been denied. These men do not change overnight, and they do not change simply to win her back. They change because her absence forces them to see what cannot be unseen. The silence she left becomes a teacher. The mirror she shattered becomes a map. They look back at their own patterns and recognize the ways they sabotage themselves. The fear of intimacy that made them pull away just as love grew close. The pride that turned tenderness into weakness. The refusal to sit with vulnerability until it was too late. For these men, loss does not become an end but a doorway. The start of a long and often painful confrontation with themselves. But most men do not choose that path. For many, the wound is too raw, the humility too foreign, the courage too scarce. Instead of transforming, they move quickly to replace. They seek another relationship, not to love differently, but to repeat the old patterns. They project their emptiness onto someone new, telling themselves the problem was her intensity, her demands, her flaws. In reality, they are simply covering the same wounds with different faces. The cycle restarts, and they mistake motion for progress. Jung warned that without facing the shadow, repetition becomes inevitable. The man who refuses to confront himself is destined to meet his shadow again and again, no matter how many new beginnings he manufactures. For the woman who left, this truth can be both liberating and heartbreaking. It means her silence may indeed wake something inside him, but it also means it might not. Her absence might ignite his transformation, or it might be swallowed by the same defenses that drove her away. Accepting that uncertainty is part of her healing, she cannot control which path he takes. The only choice she has, and the only choice that matters, is the one she already made to leave. And leaving is not the absence of love, it is often the final proof of it. To stay through the empty silences, through the contradictions and the disappointments, is not weakness but devotion. Women who love deeply often give far beyond reason. They endure, they hope, they believe again and again, until that giving turns into a slow erosion of themselves. Leaving, then, is not a declaration of superiority, but of survival. It is the moment she finally chooses to feel for herself after years of feeling for someone else. That choice is not easy. Walking away from love is never a triumphal march. It is often a quiet collapse, followed by the painstaking work of rebuilding. She leaves not because she stopped caring, but because caring had become a form of self-abandonment. She leaves not because she stopped seeing potential, but because she realized potential cannot carry both of them forever. And that act, though it feels like grief, is also a form of rebirth. What he feels in her absence is not only the loss of her presence, but the echo of everything she once carried for him. Every silence she filled, every conversation she sustained when he had nothing to give, every ounce of belief she poured into him when he doubted himself, these now return to him as empty spaces. They remind him that she was not just another partner, not just another chapter. She was the one who steadied the fragile parts of his identity. And without her, he is left face to face with what he never learned to hold on his own. Jung wrote that the human soul does not change until the pain of staying the same exceeds the fear of changing. For the man who has lost her, this is the crossroads. If he chooses distraction, denial, and repetition, the pain will persist, echoing through every future connection. But if he allows the pain to strip away the illusions, to tear down the ego's defenses, transformation can begin. It is in that silent collapse that he might finally face himself, perhaps for the first time. For her, the lesson is different. Leaving is not proof of failure, but proof of courage. It is not about what he feels, but about what she can finally feel again: her own wholeness, her own peace, her own life that no longer bends itself around someone unwilling to grow. Jung reminded us that we are not what happened to us, we are what we choose to become. And by walking away, she has chosen herself. The process of walking away, though, is rarely clean. It does not unfold like a single decisive moment, but more like a series of quiet realizations that gather weight until they can no longer be ignored. She remembers the countless nights when she held space for his silence, the times she forgave what was never acknowledged, the way she kept betting on their love while he kept betting only on himself. These memories sting, but they also clarify. They reveal that leaving was not a sudden act of abandonment, but the inevitable end of a story where she gave until giving became impossible. For him, the aftermath is a slow unraveling. At first, he resists the idea that she is truly gone. He tells himself she will come back, that this is only temporary. His ego clings to the illusion of control, convinced that as long as he does not acknowledge the loss, it is not real. He distracts himself with noise, with company, with any escape that shields him from silence. But silence has a way of finding him. In the middle of the night, when the phone is dark and the world is still, the truth seeps in. He notices the absence not in grand moments, but in the smallest details: the empty chair at dinner, the missing sound of her laughter, the way no one else quite understands his fears the way she once did. This is when regret begins its slow work. It does not announce itself dramatically. It does not crash through the door with apologies and tears. Regret waits patiently until the noise has worn thin. It appears when he hears the song she loved, or when he walks past the street they used to walk together. It sneaks in when he tries to replicate the comfort she once gave and discovers that no one else provides it. Regret is not loud, but it is persistent. It settles into his bones, reminding him that what he lost was not ordinary. And yet, regret alone does not change a man. Regret can be a teacher, but it can also be a prison. Some men sit with it, allowing it to strip away their defenses until they are ready to grow. Others resist it, burying it under layers of pride, convincing themselves it was never love, that she was too much, that the loss was not significant. In truth, their words betray their fear, for if it truly meant nothing, they would not need to insist so loudly. The deeper wound comes not from losing her, but from losing the version of himself that existed only in her presence. He remembers the way she looked at him when he was vulnerable, the way she believed in him when he doubted himself, the way she reminded him of the man he wanted to become. Without her, that version has no place to live. What remains is the stark image of who he is without the reflection of her faith, and this realization cuts deeper than loneliness. It is not just that he lost her love, it is that he failed to rise into the man she saw within him. Shame follows closely behind regret. Jung taught that shame, though painful, can be a great teacher. It strips us of illusions and forces us to confront the gap between who we are and who we could be. For the man left behind, shame appears when he recalls the promises he never kept, the needs he ignored, the moments when he turned away instead of toward her. Shame does not let him forget that she endured more than she should have, and that endurance was not weakness, but love. Facing that truth can either break him or remake him. But while he wrestles with regret and shame, her life begins to move in another direction. Slowly, she starts to heal. The silence that once felt unbearable becomes space for herself. The emptiness that once felt like loss begins to feel like possibility. She rediscovers the parts of herself that had been buried under the weight of keeping the relationship alive. This is her transformation, not fueled by revenge or bitterness, but by a return to wholeness. She learns that leaving did not mean she failed him. It meant she finally chose herself. In that act lies the ultimate paradox. The love she carried was real, and it was deep. But the moment she decided to leave was the moment she loved herself enough to stop shrinking. She left not because she stopped feeling, but because she finally allowed herself to feel what she needed. And while he may one day awaken to the full weight of what he lost, her healing no longer depends on whether he does. What unfolds over time is the stark contrast between two paths. For him, her absence is a mirror he cannot escape. For her, it is the beginning of freedom. At first, the mirror shows him only excuses. She was too demanding, too emotional, too difficult. But as days stretch into weeks, and weeks into months, the excuses lose their shine. The mirror becomes clearer, showing him what he avoided while she was still there, the distance he created when she needed closeness, the promises he broke without apology, the fears he buried instead of facing. Jung wrote that we do not see the world as it is, but as we are. And now the world he sees is one of his own inadequacy reflected back at him. This is not an easy vision to bear. Shame grows sharper with each memory. He recalls the quiet sacrifices she made, the way she continued to show up even when he did not, the loyalty that never wavered until it finally broke. And shame whispers the most piercing question of all. Why couldn't I become the man she believed I could be? That question lingers, haunting him more deeply than the absence of her presence. It reminds him that he was given something rare: patience, devotion, unconditional care, and he let it slip away. Some men try to escape this mirror by rushing forward, replacing rather than reflecting. They find someone new, not because they are ready to love differently, but because they cannot bear to face themselves alone. Yet, no matter how many times they start again, the pattern follows. The new relationship begins with the same charm, the same rush of attention, the same distraction, but eventually, the same insecurities, the same silences, the same avoidance resurface. The mirror cannot be outrun. The shadow, Jung insisted, does not disappear simply because we refuse to look at it. It waits patiently, returning in each connection until it is faced. For the woman who walked away, however, the mirror reflects something else entirely. She begins to see her own resilience, her own courage, her own worth. At first, the quiet hurts. It feels unnatural not to be tending to someone else's storms, not to be smoothing over silences or filling in the empty spaces. But slowly, the stillness transforms into something powerful. It becomes a sanctuary where she rediscovers who she is apart from him. She realizes that leaving did not erase the love she gave. It revealed its depth. For to walk away after giving your soul is not an act of indifference, but an act of profound strength. Her healing is not linear. There are days when doubt creeps in, when she wonders if she should have stayed longer, tried harder, given more. But then she remembers she already stayed too long, tried beyond reason, gave until she was empty. Healing means accepting that her worth was never measured by how much she could endure. Healing means learning that love is not proven by how tightly you hold on, but sometimes by how bravely you let go. Meanwhile, his regret deepens, but it does not always translate into growth. Some men never step beyond it. They replay the loss like a story they cannot rewrite, punishing themselves but never evolving. Others finally confront the shadow and begin the slow process of integration. They learn to sit with vulnerability, to admit weakness, to stop hiding from themselves. These men do not change to win her back. By then, it is often too late. They change because they finally understand that they cannot go on living as the man who let her slip away. The tragedy and the gift are the same. She will likely never see the full scope of what her absence awakened in him. He may never admit it aloud, may never find the courage to say what he truly felt when the mirror shattered, but whether or not he names it, the impact is there. Her silence reshaped him, either into someone who grows or someone who repeats. And that, ultimately, is not her burden to carry. For her, the lesson is clear. Leaving was not about punishing him, nor about proving anything. It was about choosing peace over chaos, self-respect over self-erasure, healing over survival. She does not need his regret to validate her choice. Her wholeness exists without his recognition, and perhaps that is the quietest, strongest form of power. There is the kind that does not demand acknowledgement, the kind that simply stands, whole and unbroken, in its own truth. Over time, distance reshapes everything. For him, the silence she left behind becomes both wound and mirror. He may never admit it to anyone, but in his private thoughts, he returns to her again and again, not because of the drama, not because of the arguments, but because of the depth of what she carried for him. He remembers her calm presence in his storms, the way she understood him even when he could not articulate his own fears, the way her belief gave him strength he could not generate alone. And though he may try to bury those memories under pride or distraction, they do not leave him. They linger like echoes in the rooms she once filled. What he feels now is not just absence, but failure. It is the awareness that she offered him a chance to grow, to love differently, to step into a fuller version of himself, and he did not take it. Regret settles in not as fire, but as stone, heavy and immovable. Jung taught that transformation requires facing the shadow, and the shadow often awakens only through loss. For him, that moment has come. Whether he confronts it or not will define the rest of his life. For her, though, the story unfolds differently. With each passing day, she reclaims the parts of herself she had set aside. She remembers what it feels like to live without constantly managing someone else's silence, without holding together what was never balanced. She learns that love should not feel like erasure. She discovers that leaving was not the end of her love story, but the beginning of her return to herself. There is power in that realization, not the sharp power of revenge, but the quiet power of peace. It is the strength that comes from choosing not to beg, not to explain, not to remain in spaces where growth is refused. It is the wisdom of understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is the one you give to yourself when you finally stop shrinking to fit into someone else's unfinished life. Jung once said, "You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become." By leaving, she has chosen to become whole again, by refusing to let her worth be measured by someone else's inability to grow. She has reclaimed her story, and while he may continue to wrestle with the shadow of what he lost, she walks forward with the quiet certainty that her healing matters more than his recognition. In the end, the question of what he feels is secondary. Yes, he feels the collapse of ego, the sting of shame, the weight of regret. Yes, he may one day confront his shadow and change, or he may spend his life repeating the same broken patterns. But none of that defines her. Her worth is not tied to his growth or his regret. What defines her is the courage it took to love deeply, the strength it took to walk away, and the grace it takes to rebuild herself without bitterness. Leaving was never about punishing him. It was about loving herself enough to choose peace over pride, wholeness over fragments, truth over illusion. And in that choice lies the greatest freedom of all. If this message touched you, take a moment to reflect on your own journey. Like, share, and subscribe so that others may find strength in these words. And in the comments, tell me what was the moment that finally made you choose yourself. And what have you discovered since you did? Your story matters, and your healing begins here.